Once again, all this and much, much more can be found in my new book, The Common Sense Ethics of a Blue-Collar Philosopher. In this video, I'd like to make another crucial distinction between having faith in someone and putting trust in someone. When you have faith in someone, such as a religious leader, you're taking their word for something when absolutely no observable or verifiable proof is available, such as believing the Pope's opinions on various subjects is fine if you're a Catholic, but if you believe the Pope is giving God's opinions, you're putting your faith in him. Of course, you may argue that you're putting your trust in him as well, but the trust you're putting in him is only in relation to giving correct Catholic doctrine, not God's opinions. Once he, or any other mystic, starts giving God's opinions, it becomes a matter of faith because he, or they, cannot prove he, or they, know God's opinions. They all fall back on their own religious doctrines, dogmas, or their personal experiences. That's why it's called faith. Trust, on the other hand, is based on knowledge of someone and on observable, verifiable evidence. For example, I put my trust in my mechanic because he can prove to me that he knows how my automobile works. And if I wanted to take the time, he could prove to me why and how he knows what he knows. It's not a matter of faith because he can simply show me or take out a manual on the make and model of my car and say, here's my proof. Here's how I know what I know. And every other mechanic in the world could do the same. I could take my Ford to any Ford dealership in the entire world and I'll get basically the same answers to the same questions. But is this true when asking questions of God? Not even close. If I'm in China, am I going to get the same answers as in Iran? If I'm in India, am I going to get the same answers as in Japan? If I'm in France, am I going to get the same answers as in Brazil? If I'm in Russia, am I going to get the same answers as in Mozambique? If I'm in the United States, am I going to get the same answers as in Bangladesh? Once again, not even close. Even in the same country, the answers won't be completely the same. Jews put their faith in Moses because it cannot be proven Moses spoke to God, or knew any of God's opinions. That's why it's called faith. Christians put their faith in Jesus because it cannot be proven Jesus was God, was the Son of God, or knew any of God's opinions. That's why it's called faith. Muslims put their faith in Muhammad because it cannot be proven Allah revealed knowledge to him through the angel Gabriel, or that there is an angel named Gabriel, or that there are even angels, or that the revelation was from God, or even that there is a God. That's why it's called faith. Mormons put their faith in Joseph Smith because, etc. And the same goes for all other religions as well. That's why they're all called faiths. And for you people of faith, think about this. If faith is all that's needed, then all religions must be true, right? So obviously, simply having faith is not enough. I put my trust in a scientist because he can show me the evidence that led him to his conclusion or theory. This doesn't mean he must always be right, or that only that he first looks at the evidence and then secondly draws a conclusion. The evidence is primary, the conclusion is secondary. For religions, the conclusion, their sacred text, is primary, while the evidence is secondary. All religions start with the conclusion, their sacred text, then search for evidence that will confirm their foregone conclusion. If they find evidence that's contrary to their conclusion, it's the evidence that must be faulty, not their sacred text. Or as Socrates put it when trying to describe the difference between religion and philosophy, religion is truth possessed, while philosophy is truth pursued. Of course, in reality, philosophy is truth pursued, but religion is only the dogmatic belief of truth possessed. But he was close. Maybe a better way to compare putting your trust in someone rather than having faith in them is to compare evolution and creationism. Creationism is based on faith, while evolution is based on trust. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of mythical stories of creation from around the world. In fact, we couldn't even begin to count the number of creation stories that have been lost forever through the passing of time. But they all have one thing in common. Not one of the believers of any of those countless stories can put forth any objective evidence to prove their myth of creation is any more valid than anyone else's. In fact, if it wasn't for the religion's sacred text, they wouldn't even be able to argue the issue. Their entire argument is wrapped up in a story, or stories, that were written thousands of years ago by scientifically ignorant men. If it wasn't for their ancestors' myth story, there would be no debate at all. However, this isn't the case with evolution. The theory of evolution could only be formed after actual physical evidence was observed. Scientists, archaeologists, anthropologists, biologists, botanists, genealogists, geneticists, geologists, paleontologists, etc., can put evidence right in front of my face and say, here you go. Here's my evidence, and here's my theory based on the evidence. Like Darwin before them, they came up with a theory only after making observations, never before. This is why we put trust in scientists and not faith, although we must always be on guard for scientists who take leaps of faith. Trust is based on knowledge of observable, verifiable, and natural facts of reality. Faith is based on nothing more than someone's unprovable words, dreams, revelations, fantasies, or unverifiable supernatural beliefs. This is why trust is a real value and faith is not. This is also why anything that anyone says about God is based on nothing more than mere faith. Now, allow me to make another important distinction concerning faith. I once heard a highly respected professor of the history of science say, to be an atheist requires a great leap of faith. That is, to assent to the unprovable premise that there is no God. Both the theist and atheist have faith. Only one is positive faith, while the other is negative faith. If this is what's being taught by our best universities, it's no wonder why we're so confused when it comes to the difference between knowing and believing, faith and trust, and religion and science. What complete and absolute nonsense. The problem in this particular instance lies in not distinguishing between taking a leap of faith and making an assumption. Taking a leap of faith may be considered making an assumption, but it's an assumption that has no proof or evidence to back it up. For example, if you believe in God, it's a leap of faith. If you believe your religion is God's religion, it's a leap of faith. If you believe in life after death, it's a leap of faith, etc. But an assumption is much more than just a leap of faith. All science is based on assumption. The assumption that things will operate the same tomorrow as they do today. That gravity will function tomorrow as it does today. That the sun will rise tomorrow as it did today. That when we mix chemicals together, they'll react together the same way tomorrow as they do today. That when a doctor washes his hands before surgery, it'll kill the germs tomorrow as it does today, etc. Assumptions are based on things that have already been proven in reality, while leaps of faith are based on things that have not been proven in reality. And that's about as different as you can possibly get. So in reality, there's no such thing as negative faith, only positive faith. Let me give an example that makes the point even clearer. I was once involved in a theological debate when one of my opponents asked one of the people that was on my side one of the most convoluted questions I've ever heard. If you don't believe there's a devil, then on what basis is your faith that denies his existence? Let me repeat that. If you don't believe there's a devil, then on what basis is your faith that denies his existence? Do you see how utterly impossible it is to answer such a ridiculous question? So I responded, there's no such thing as faith that denies, only faith that affirms. The person who has faith in something. The person who denies has no faith in that which they're denying. That's called lack of faith. With that said, my opponent said, you gotta love this. Faith that denies something is faith that affirms the denial of something. Once again, faith that denies something is faith that affirms the denial of something. Do you see the verbal gymnastics this person must go through in order to attempt to prove their point? It was like something straight out of George Orwell's 1984. When a person says, I have faith in, etc., they have faith. When a person says, I don't have faith in, etc., they don't have faith. In essence, they are faithless. To have something is to possess it. To not have something is to not possess it. In other words, the lack of faith is not faith. And to not believe is to not believe. Not believing is not a belief. It's the lack of belief. It really is that simple. The reason people of faith want to confuse the issue is because they know when a person has faith, that faith is always baseless and completely unprovable. That's why it's called faith in the first place. And if their position is unprovable, they want to make sure that the person they're arguing against also has an unprovable position. Thus, they say something amazing like, your lack of faith is your faith. Either not understanding that the lack of faith is not faith, or deliberately confusing the issue in order not to lose the argument. Either way, they're just plain wrong. Thanks for your time.